All right, welcome back. So the title of this mini lecture is The Vietnam War Till 1968. So we're going to focus in on 1965 to 1968. And we're going to talk about five things that you need to be thinking about in order to understand and start doing some more in-depth research as it relates to the Vietnam War. So let's dig in. This is a complex topic. So the first thing for us to know about would be Operation Rolling Thunder. Okay. Now, Operation Rolling Thunder was a bombing campaign that was approved of by the President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson, in early 1965. Johnson was, and many in the command and staff of the military at the time were big believers of the idea of bombing. Bombing had, to them, proven to be effective during World War II, and so they argued that it could accomplish the same thing in the Vietnam War. They argued that the more you could bomb the North Vietnamese, the more you could, of course, damage their military capabilities, cause civilian disruption, economic disruption, and then you would eventually bring individuals to the bargaining table. Now, although there is a great deal of economic disruption that occurs in North Vietnam, the desired objective here is not going to be met, although the United States is going to still keep bombing. But Rolling Thunder was kind of the beginning of this idea, that kind of carrot and stick approach, that the Americans are going to offer liberal developmentalism, and they'll pull back the bombing if the North Vietnamese agree to come to the bargaining table. All right. Second, search and destroy. So between 1965 and 68, there are a wide variety of tactics implemented throughout South Vietnam writ large, and search and destroy tends to become a very common one. So U.S. forces would not follow a base line of battle like they had in World War II. They would be flown in typically to a particular area, usually rural, dropped off, and they will walk through the area with the understanding being that if they encounter any kind of resistance, to engage with those individuals, or if they discover any kinds of things that they think would be of military necessity, to destroy those as well. Now, of course, what this meant in practice was that you saw on the part of the Americans an action which would really alienate many within South Vietnam. There was perhaps a misunderstanding on the part of the Americans that this would be, of course, quite alienating. Third, who is America fighting? So when the war gets going in Vietnam in the 1960s, remember, most of the American military leadership had cut their teeth in World War II in Korea, and in particular World War II, fighting a uniformed enemy. So there was always an understanding and thought that what we were really doing is kind of fighting the war for now, when the big war is going to come, with China or with the North Vietnamese army kind of down the road. So that never really happens, but the two main forces that the Americans are fighting is, yes, they're going to fight the North Vietnamese army, the NVA regulars, but they're also going to fight what we might call militia or civilian irregulars or guerrilla fighters, whatever you want to call it, revolutionary fighters, that the Americans came to call individuals who were VC. Now, these are individuals who, for the most part, live in the South, but they're loyal to the idea of a unified Vietnam. And the Americans didn't particularly understand the nature of that constructed fight. Fourth, tour of duty. So if you were an American soldier here by the mid to late 1960s, most volunteered up until about 1966, 1967. But by the end of the 60s, the majority of these individuals are going to become eventually draftees. They are young, average age about 19 to 20, 21, and disproportionately working class or individuals from communities of color. And instead of deploying necessarily as a unit, most of these individuals are going to be sent over with the understanding that they're going to have a one-year tour to complete, and then once that is over, then they get to go home. So there's positives in terms of motivation for the soldiers, but there's also motivational questions in terms of commitment to the fight, the nature of the unanimity of the American military here. All right, fifth point, Tet Offensive. Tet Offensive. So this occurs in early 1968. The previous 3 to 4 years, there'd been from Military Assistance Command Vietnam, what's called MACV, a real continual statement to the American press that this is a war that's being won. Body count was used as a metric for victory, and of course body counts were always quite high, that eventually if you killed enough of these individuals, that eventually the Americans would win. But Tet Offensive begins during the Tet Holiday, 1968, where you see a comprehensive attack across South Vietnam against American military posts and those of our allies and that of South Vietnam. And it really kind of demonstrated, although the Americans militarily win the Tet Offensive, it was a very bloody fight. It really kind of demonstrated the hypocrisy of a lot of the message and the rhetoric that had been coming from MACV. Thank you very much.